Okay, and then we can already set up for the next talk. So the next presentation will be given by Felix Effenberger, and this is joint work with colleagues from Ernst Strüngmann Institute for Neuroscience in Frankfurt, the Frankfurt Institute of Advanced Studies, and MPI for Brain Research, also Frankfurt. The title of the next talk will be Biologically Inspired Oscillator Networks and the Functional Role of Oscillatory Dynamics in Neocortical Circuits.
Okay, we're still waiting for the... Now we should see it in a second. First of all, I want to thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to present our work here. This is joint work in the Singer Group at the Ernst Strüngmann Institute in Frankfurt with two of my PhD students, Pedro and Igor. I changed the title a bit. I don't know if who of you has seen the talk of Max Welling, which is very much aligned with what I'm going to tell you here. And so, because we also looked at oscillations, they are ubiquitous in nature. They happen at all scales, from the micro to the macro scale. I think there's a lot of physicists here in the room. So basically everything is a field, everything kind of is a wave, if you look more closely. So from galaxies to strings, everything oscillates. And also, we have oscillations in neuroscience, right? These are, as one of our reviewers once put it, one of the most overstudied phenomena in neuroscience. It wasn't a very nice review you got there. They're a natural consequence of when you have inhibitory excitatory systems. And of course, they have also been used for computations. Usually, a lot of works came out in the recent years, but I would say these are still rather simplistic approaches. If you compare this, for example, to modern machine learning, still very, very interesting applications. In some cases, being able to solve same types of optimization problems that usually people use quantum annealers to solve. So I think a very promising area of research. And what I'm going to talk about you today here is basically a work at the intersection of neuroscience and artificial intelligence. Some people call this neuro-AI now. So on the one hand, we have biological intelligence, which is analog, recurrent. The signals are time series. We have oscillations and waves in those systems. Local and fast online learning, lifelong learning, highly energy constrained, highly energy efficient. Our brain uses around 30 watts for doing everything that it does. And then on the other hand, we have artificial intelligence, digital, feed forward, most of the time, no time being represented in those systems. Training happens in a supervised way, even though, you know, they call this self-supervised training for these transformer models and language models now, but it's still backpropagation as the algorithm. It's slow, it's data intensive, and it's extremely energy hungry. If you don't believe me, Microsoft's actually looking for atomic engineers now to power they're thinking of building small atomic power plants to power their data centers. And actually what we see in those transformer models and state space models recently, these are essentially recurrent architectures, approximated recurrent architectures. I think of transformers as like basically a Taylor expansion of recurrent dynamics to a certain degree. And we all know that, you know, how powerful the first derivative is in those approximations. But I really think what we'll see in the next decades will be even more exciting. And because, but the prerequisite for that is moving away from the current computational architecture, because the current architectures that we have are chips that can do matrix multiplications very well. And so basically, our question that we had for our work is, first of all, oscillations, they're there. They're unavoidable. Are they also useful? This is a very long-standing and ongoing debate in the neuroscience, very fiercely discussed to this date. There's oscillation lovers and oscillation haters. But we do this in a way where we basically do two things. We take ideas from machine learning, we take ideas from neuroscience, because in neuroscience, many times you make models, and you don't care about whether the model solves a problem. You only care about reproducing experimental data, for example. So we say we do two things. We take recurrent models, they're biologically inspired. We simulate them on the computer. And then we quantify task performance, and we take the task performance on, for example, certain pattern recognition tasks as a proxy for functional relevance. So I described all that. Recurrent networks, they receive time series stimuli. We care about dynamics and principles, and not just scores. And the same time for machine learning, we care about scores also, but just not only. And we're using a gradient-based training. And so basically what I'm going to show you a lot today are these MNIST-based stimuli. I know it's a simple data set, it's boring. Still, everybody uses it to this day. And the most simple way to turn an MNIST digit into time series is to collect all the pixels in a scanline fashion. So every digit gets turned into a time series of 784 time steps. These are being fed into the RNN. The RNN is trained after stimulus presentation to do a stimulus classification with backpropagation. Why did we do that? This is motivated by this work that came out of the ICNCE in 2022, where the authors find that in sum, V1 gamma dynamics is well described by the simplest possible model of gamma, a damped harmonic oscillator driven by noise. So what did we decide? We said, okay, let's take those oscillators, put them in an RNN, see what happens. So it's the quintessential, it's a reduction of the oscillatory phenomena to their quintessence, which is a damped harmonic oscillator. I assume most of you know the equation here. Every physics student sees that in the first semester, second order ODE. We get sinusoidal oscillations with an exponential decay. We have two independently parameters that can vary independently. They vary the natural frequency and the dampening. And the fun thing is it captures essential characteristics of Wilson-Cowan model, which describes, as we know, population dynamics of EI-coupled populations. And so, in a sense, this model here is to be considered a network of networks. So every unit here is don't think about the unit as a neuron, but actually as a microcircuit or cortical column. So from the standpoint of digital signal processing, the DHO turns any input into an harmonic oscillation, which is a standing wave in that node. And if they're connected in a network, that wave spreads. We can code through amplitude and phase, which is much better. For example, here's an example where we have a stimulus, the blue and the red stimulus here, and the oscillator can code in its phase the stimulus sequence by having coding that in the phase shift. So it's an additional variable that you can use for coding. And we have nonlinear amplitude modulation based on the input frequency. And what's very important here, look at that. So what you see on the horizontal axis here is the input frequency with the respect. So it's the quotient of the input frequency and the natural frequency. So when we go to 0, basically, it tapers off to 1. When we go to infinity, it tapers off to 0, means the higher the frequency, the further away from its natural frequency, the more it gets attenuated. But when it's slow, the oscillator can be entrained. And that results in the following situation here. I present the same oscillator, two different signals, the orange one and the blue one. You see the blue one is corrupted by very high levels of noise. And this is the response of the unit above. So you see they're basically, every single unit is intrinsically, so to say, noise canceling. So we put those into an RNN and additively couple them on their derivative, and this is motivated by the balance state where units basically in the brain, we think they communicate to their neighbors their rate of change rather than their state. So that's what we do. We couple on the derivative. And I already talked about the Wilson-Cohen model. Well, you can say, and I get this a lot, that's fine, man. But every network oscillates. The oscillations are just the exhaust of the engine. OK, my answer says, wait. Could they not also be useful? And we generated here, we have a setting where we can prove this. And we show how, when we force oscillatory activations in the nodes, how the network, how the learning algorithms can exploit those, and how the network's code, for example, we get feature detectors by means of resonance, we get wave-based representations. And yes, you can build oscillators very easily out of non-oscillating units, but backpropagation will not discover this. So, and at the same time, what we, so to say, discover here in terms of principle is immediately also applicable to non-oscillating networks if they oscillate on the network level. So we look at different variants: homogeneous, heterogeneous, delay-coupled, and modular, again, biologically inspired. These are the learning curves here. So you see here the number of training steps in a logarithmic scale, and the accuracy. This is on sequential MNIST. The blue and the orange lines here are our networks. The dashed gray line is the first training epoch. So those things haven't even seen the complete data set once and are at 90% of their final accuracy. And the other, so to say, networks you see here, LSTM and GRU, you see they actually take dozens and dozens of epochs until they start converging. On the right-hand side, you see parameter efficiency. We can do sequential MNIST classification to, I would say, 85% accuracy with 16 trainable parameters. Same thing also works for more complicated data sets. This is speaker invariant word recognition. We directly feed the sound pressure level of the microphone into the network, no pre-processing, no spectrograms. And you see all the other models here never depart from chance level. This is a 1 in 10, so to say, classification problem. And the blue and the orange one are our oscillator networks, where the orange one is the heterogeneous one, where this is another point I will probably talk about later. And then also for, if you've seen the talk of Anna Levina, we tested them on some transformer, so to say, networks here. And at least for some problems, we can basically blow away million parameter transformer models with untuned parameters in 18,000 trainable parameters. We get, because of the property that I showed you earlier, insane noise resiliency. Here on the right plot here, sorry, left plot for you, you will see the noise level used during training and the accuracy for different network types. As you see, our oscillators, again in blue and orange, are basically don't care about the noise. They can ignore the noise. And the green and the pink line here, these are LSTM and GRU. They quickly fall back to chance level. We can even train on very noisy data sets here to the right, and then change the noise characteristics during inference. And the networks actually, when trained with noisy stimuli, develop representations that are useful also for classifying non-noisy stimuli. We looked a bit at the theory of this. This was done by Igor, one of the PhD students I'm supervising. And we did a Lyapunov exponent analysis of those networks, and basically find that the discretization scheme that we introduce in the definition of the nodal dynamics acts as a residual connection time, like in a ResNet or a neural ODE. And we show that also the closer the networks go to criticality, the better the overall accuracy, and the faster the learning speed. But there is a trade-off. If you cross the critical point, you fall down into nothing. So you want to get as close probably as possible to criticality without stepping over it. We also looked at why oscillations in those data sets help you. and because they serve as an inductive bias. So people interested in math, have a look at this paper. In the question of time, I'm going to skip this one. The networks form, we look at them, as I said, from a neuroscience type standpoint. They form fine-scale, stimulus-specific dynamic correlation patterns. And this is similar to what we see in actual neural data. And we also looked at the chromotor parameter of those systems. And we found that, yeah, there is, first of all, the networks have to learn to desynchronize. But once they are desynchronized, that provides the bed of creating fine-scale, temporally modulated dynamic patterns of synchronization. And we find that all kinds of heterogeneity that we tested in those models and that we introduced, they boost task performance by increasing the dimensionality of the representation. So we argue that all the heterogeneity that you see in nature, different cell types, different time scales, modularity, etc., they're not a consequence of nature's imprecision, but they're actually there because they make the system more robust, especially to unknown stimulus characteristics. We find that in our networks, backpropagation learning, and I'm sorry I have to rush this here, backpropagation learning is compatible with Hebbian principles. We have implemented experimental Hebbian rule. We find it works almost as well as pure backpropagation training. And when we drive those networks with geometrically organized stimuli, we find that we get the local weight configurations that Max Welling was talking about in his talk. We basically get this as an emergent phenomenon due to the stimulus characteristics. So if we shuffle the stimuli, this is shown here to the right, we do not get this characteristic, and people probably recognize this as a kind of Mexican head curve, where we get local cooperation and then, so to say, inhibition. When we look at those models, we get traveling waves. Here you see the amplitude on the right, on the left side, and the phases on the right. And you can already visually tell how these are different per stimulus class. You might see the digit being shown here. And we're building those, oops, there was a, sorry for the mess up here. We're building those networks right now in analog hardware with a partner in Frankfurt. We have a prototype, you see that here to the right, with only 4 coupled oscillators and 16 trainable parameters in actual hardware. We can do MNIST digital classification with like 75% accuracy. This is done by Pedro. And I just wanted to say that this is, we think, this is a very powerful approach of computing with waves. And one of my favorite papers, by the way, here, supervised chaotic source separation by a tank of water. So just to show you how powerful this wave-based representation is, we're kind of also think that this is ideally suited with the upcoming, so to say, analog and physics-based computations that we see more and more, where also electric and photonic techniques are being combined. And believe it or not, I think there are relationships to quantum computing, namely that you can solve quite some of the problems that we currently use quantum computers for with analog wave-based representations, in which we use waves and their interference patterns to do the computations. So in summary, we propose a biology-inspired RNN of oscillators. We think that only this reduction allowed us to actually give functional consequences for the functional interpretations. The units code in frequencies and frequency space. The networks learn to desynchronize. The learning is compatible with Hebbian principles. By the way, also we're looking, or our attention is to look a bit into memristors as coupling elements there. Heterogeneity is not nature's imprecision or fault, but it actually makes the networks more stable. And the model in general has a interesting ties to biological data. And all in all, we propose a novel view in recurrent dynamics where the network is a nonlinear anisotropic medium for the propagation of waves. And any input is turned into a spatiotemporal wave pattern. The network dynamics are rich, non-stationary, and leading to interference patterns. And the units can utilize for feature extraction not just convergent weights, but actually temporal properties and properties such as resonance. With that, I want to thank you. Sorry for being over time a bit.
Thank you very much for this very interesting talk. We already have the first questions lined up.
Yeah, very interesting talk, and it reminds me, takes me back to the 80s and 90s, and it's nice to see Wolf Singer up there. But I'm not quite clear on your network. So these harmonic oscillators have two states, like you said. You couple X and X dot.
We only couple X dot.
Oh, you only couple X dot. Okay,
Yeah.
so your coupling is just like some resistor coupling between the two X dots. The difference between the X dots is the current going back and forth.
Exactly. So
And is it okay?
Mathematically, it's just an additive coupling on the derivative.
And then you show the network as a sort of a 2D topography, but is the connectivity all-to-all or local?
Yeah, so I've shown different cases. Actually, sorry for having hasted over this. We have one case where we have an unstructured network without any topography, where it's all-to-all. And for the structured network, it's initially all-to-all. We don't have any structural priors, but through learning, actually, so we learned the network with backpropagation, we let it, so to say, classify those MNIST digits. The input is geometrically organized. The cells, the units, have defined geometric receptive fields. And as a consequence, basically, the network learns the statistical regularities in the stimuli.
So, and then it's just one layer, or this sort of recurrent?
Just one layer.
Yeah, okay. So what's your intuition for why it lends so effectively? And also, what's your intuition for, how do you define this critical point, or is that just empirically defined?
First of all, we are able, by choosing the natural frequencies and the dampening factors, and we argue that this is something that nature could have figured out during the course of evolution to adapt, so to say, to the natural to the statistics of the natural stimuli. We can already have, this is what I described, we can have feature detectors, for example, by means of resonance. And they can detect those features more or less independent of their incoming weights. So we're basically adding another layer of how the network can code. It does not, if you do, for example, certain things with non-oscillating architectures, such as leaky integrators or LSTM or gated units, they will not have this property because they cannot use resonance. And at least not on the, on the nodal level. Of course, you can build something, right? To the question, to the critical point, no, this is very well mathematically defined. So basically, we show that these networks have well-defined Lyapunov exponents, and that we can show the closer we move with the Lyapunov exponent to the critical point, meaning, so to say, meaning 1, then the better, so to say, the network performance gets. And we can also show, for example, that when a network is subcritical and we add heterogeneity, we're bringing it closer to the critical point.
Okay, thank you. We have time for one more question.
Yeah. Hey, Felix.
Hey.
Thanks for the nice talk, as always. I have a question. I would basically wear the hat of the machine learning dude, I guess, now. But so you have oscillators. So when you're going to use backprop, your gradient is going to be a recursive oscillating system as well.
Correct.
Right? And I'm just wondering about scalability of that. Like, do you think that how your gradient is going to behave when you're going to stack, if you're going to try to have multiple layers? Like, do you think this is going to be more prone to, you know what I mean, right? Exploding gradients or whatever?
I actually think that's a very good question. So if you have, and we have done multi-layer networks, if you make them commensurate in the frequencies, right? When you have, that's the cool thing about multi-layer networks, they can code, they can analyze and code with the stimulus in 2 different frequency bands. And what we found is that it actually breaks down if you put them in the same frequency band. You have to separate them, and commensurable, so to say, quotients work best, by the way, which we find in the brain also. If you look in the brain, the more downstream you go in your processing, the lower the frequencies, the high frequencies happen, you know, at the most, so to say, at the least abstract levels when the signal go in, so to say, and then you see a lot of integer multiples also in the brain. So, what I want to show you here, let me go back to the, where was this? Was a bit earlier. Here. The plot here to the, no, sorry, I'm seeing another slide than you here. So the plot here to the right, only disregard the orange one here. Just look at the blue one. This is the maximal task performance that we get after training when systematically varying the oscillation frequency of our units, the natural frequency of all the units. And this is homogeneous networks, they all have the same. And what we can actually show is that these oscillations also modulate the gradients over time. So basically, the network is more responsive to certain relative timescales, so to say, relative times going back from the current time point. And we think that this kind of acts like a bit of an attention mechanism, as people would call it now in machine learning, where it kind of disregards certain gradients. Certainly, to answer your question, I don't know. I mean, it needs to be tested, but that's an idea I never had. Yeah, how those things could potentially also create problems. Yeah.
Oh yeah, but that looks like an inductive bias that you could use to have
exactly
different time frequencies at different layers, and then they will not overlap, like, or you know,
that's
they
exactly
will not interfere with each other, perhaps.
Exactly. Right. That's exactly what we show in this work.
Yeah.
Is that basically those oscillatory architecture are one type of inductive bias that doesn't work. By the way, this is the red line that you see here. This is when you permute MNIST. So where you destroy all spectral properties in the signal. So to say, you have a completely flat spectrum. Then your oscillations, whatever single frequency they are, will not help you. But when you have heterogeneity, this means you're spanning, you're shotgunning your frequency space with many units. Then, in this case, you will really see that how the heterogeneous networks vastly outperforms any single homogeneous one. And this led us to the conclusion that this is why we think, you know, nature uses the heterogeneity, because parameter searches for your digital models are cumbersome and computationally expensive. But they're likely infeasible for a system, natural system like the brain. Yeah. So this is why you would shotgun your space, be heterogeneous, introduce all kinds of timescales to your system, and then optimally code whatever comes in.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's a very nice closing word. So let's thank the speaker again.